Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into a really fascinating and I think pretty profound idea, inspired by the philosopher Daniel N. Robinson. It's about this subtle, almost invisible shift in how we think about the world. This move from believing reality is something we discover to believing it's something we create through our methods and procedures. And that one little change, well, it has huge consequences for everything, from our justice system to the very idea of freedom.
This quote right here, it's pretty much the key to everything we're talking about today. What Robinson is saying is that for words like praise and blame to mean anything, they have to be pointing to something real about a person or what they did. It can't just be about our feelings or some social convention. This idea that morality is grounded in reality is the foundation we're going to build on.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to unpack this new definition of reality. Then we'll look at how methods started to take the place of truth itself. After that, we'll get into the real world's consequences, check out a potential antidote called moral realism, and then finally we'll wrap it all up to see what this all means for our freedom.
All right, let's jump right into our first section. We're talking about what Robinson saw as a great inversion, this fundamental flip in what we even mean when we use the word real.
So here is the big switch up. For most of history, reality was, the world that's out there whether we're looking at it or not. But that definition has been turned on its head. Now, more and more, reality is just whatever can be measured and processed by an approved method. If you can't capture it in a peer-reviewed study, if it's not on a policy checklist, it's almost treated like it isn't fully real.
And this chart, man, it just lays it out so perfectly. In the classical way of thinking, a method was just a tool you'd use to get closer to a truth that already existed. But in the modern view, if an idea is the result of the right process, like a scientific experiment or a democratic vote, then that result is the truth. The method doesn't serve truth anymore, it actually defines it.
Okay, so moving on. Let's see how this big philosophical change becomes a set of unwritten rules for how we live together. Robinson called it the Civic Catechism of Modernity, which is basically a new set of core beliefs you're just sort of expected to buy into.
So, these are the new rules of the game. First, if you can't measure it empirically, it doesn't count as knowledge. Second, any talk of moral absolutes gets sidelined as just your subjective opinion. Third, big questions about the fundamental nature of reality, that's metaphysics, get dismissed as old-fashioned and even authoritarian. And finally, being objective isn't about being true to reality anymore. It's about following the correct procedure.
Now, it's super important to get this next part right. This whole mindset is rooted in something called scientism. And no, that's not the same thing as science. Science is a practice, a method. Scientism is the philosophical belief that the scientific method is the only way to find truth. And the irony, of course, is that you can't prove that belief using the scientific method itself.
And here's where it gets really sticky. When method becomes the definition of truth, then the people and institutions that control the methods, we're talking universities, labs, government agencies, they become the ultimate source of authority. Legitimacy isn't about being right about the world anymore, it's about having followed the approved procedure.
Okay, let's bring this down from the clouds. How does this abstract stuff actually have a real-world effect on our laws, our institutions, and our society?
Well, you don't have to look much further than our legal system to see some really high-stakes consequences,
Especially when it comes to this core legal idea called mens rea. It sounds fancy, but it's just Latin for guilty mind. It's this bedrock principle that says you can only be held responsible for a crime if you intended to do it. The whole concept rests on the belief that people are free agents who make actual choices. But see, if you start thinking of people as just, a bundle of brain chemistry and social conditioning, what happens to that idea of a guilty mind? It kind of dissolves, right? If your actions are just the predictable output of a bunch of variables, where's the personal responsibility? Justice stops being a moral question and starts becoming a technical problem of how to best manage people.
And this is where you start to see something that looks a lot like a new kind of civic religion. The scientist becomes a bit like the priest, the one who interprets reality for the rest of us. The peer review process becomes the sacred ritual, the sacrament that makes a claim valid. And evidence-based policy becomes the liturgy, the official script we're all supposed to follow.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty serious picture. But what's the way out? Well, Robinson points to something he calls moral realism.
So what on earth is moral realism? It's actually a pretty straightforward idea. It's the belief that good and evil aren't just opinions or cultural habits or the results of a procedure. It's the view that they are real, objective features of the world that we can actually discover, kind of like they're part of the fabric of reality itself.
And this brings us right back to where we started. Robinson's whole point is that every single time we praise someone for doing something good or blame them for doing something wrong, we are, whether we know it or not, acting like moral realists. We're saying that their action had a real moral quality to it, completely separate from how we might feel about it.
You see, for Robinson, this isn't some dusty philosophical game. Moral realism is the anchor. It's what gives concepts like justice and responsibility their weight. It grounds them in something solid, something outside of ourselves, instead of letting them float around on the changing tides of procedure or public opinion.
So this brings us to the big one, the so what question. What does all this philosophy have to do with our freedom?
This right here, this is the ultimate takeaway. The moment a society decides that its procedures are the source of all truth and reality, the very meaning of freedom changes. It stops being about self-governance, about living according to your conscience and the truth. Instead, it becomes a matter of being properly managed, of being administered by the experts who control the procedures.
So trying to recover this sense of realism, it isn't about being dogmatic. It's about actively defending these bright lines, the line between truth and power, between acting on your conscience and being coerced, and crucially, between real knowledge and simple propaganda.
In the end, what Robinson is really arguing for is a kind of integrity. He's suggesting that insisting on a real, objective truth isn't about trying to control other people. It's about refusing to live your own life based on a reality that's been manufactured by a process, and instead choosing to align yourself with what is actually really true.
And that leaves us with this one big, critical question to chew on. If our procedures truly do replace reality, does our freedom eventually become just another form of administration? It's a powerful thought. Thanks so much for joining me for this one.